Welcome to our hazardous waste training video designed to get you thinking about what waste you create or generate at your business. This is the first step in figuring out if hazardous waste regulations apply to you. As you can tell by the title of the slide, we regulate hazardous waste. If a business creates waste, it is their responsibility to identify the things they create that are regulated. After all, who should know more about the waste stream than the business that knows the materials and the process that made the waste in the first place? No doubt you've heard the term hazmat before, which is shorthand for hazardous materials. Hazardous materials include dangerous products and waste. They are regulated by US DOT to ensure the safe movement of dangerous items while being transported in the air, the sea, by rail, or on the roads. Hazardous waste is only a small part of all hazardous materials. If it is not a waste, our regulations don't cover it. What you call a waste may not be exactly what we regulators call a waste. Waste can be used or unused. It's probably easier to imagine a used waste than one that is unused. Generally, we all think of waste as things that have been used until they aren't useful anymore, or they're worn out. But unused things can be waste too. Consider a chemical that's past its expiration date, or a material that you've had since 1987 for a process that you don't do anymore, but found in a retiree's desk. If you have containers of materials that are half used or half empty, recognize that the portion that is still left in the container is considered unused. If it is a waste, it may be an unused hazardous waste. Later on in this presentation, we'll discuss how materials that are forgotten or ignored can turn into unused waste as well. Let's get started. Your first step in identifying your hazardous waste is to identify your waste streams. Then, once we have a list of them all, we'll worry about whether or not they're hazardous. Take an in-depth look at your facility. Look in the obvious places and the not so obvious places. As an inspector, when I visit a facility, I constantly ask, what is this? Or what's in this container? Or what's in that cabinet? You should do the same. Let me try and help you identify some common and less common places where waste are found. The first place to check is the garbage. Odd items have a way of making their way into the trash, and you'll want to identify them. You know, not everyone is as tuned into environmental dangers and what's appropriate to go in the trash as you are. Identify if anything improper is in the garbage and view it as an opportunity to educate staff. You should also consider the normal items that are put in your trash every day. Looking ahead, we'll later consider whether or not they could be hazardous. Drains are another place to investigate. You probably already have a pretty good idea about what processes at your facility are sent to a drain. Make sure that staff throughout the facility know what is allowed and what isn't. Again, in future segments, we'll look at what makes things hazardous, but for now, be aware that even though a water inspector for your town or city is okay with you sending a waste down the drain, it doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't disposing of hazardous waste improperly. Usually, the two regulators have different standards. Also, take a tour of your facility and ask staff in different departments what they put into sinks, sumps, and other drains. If you have a laboratory, take a close look at anything that is sent down the small sink and fume hoods. Very often, this is a disposal route that's overlooked. Also, take a look at what material they use to wash glassware and where that waste goes. Sometimes things are so common we don't even think of them as potential hazardous waste. Look at mop water. It has soap, water, and dirt, right? But what's really on your floor? What debris or chemical residues are there, and what will end up in the mop water? Dirt isn't always just dirt. There are a lot of processes that make waste we may overlook. A fairly common one is non-hazardous wastewater that is evaporated to reduce its volume. However, as the water component is evaporated, any dirt or contaminants in the waste become concentrated and can then become hazardous as a result. Does your wash or mop water go into an evaporator? So that stuff in it is getting concentrated, right? Not everything that is disposed of is visible. Evaporation is a common illegal route of disposing of hazardous waste, especially at small facilities. When it's done in a permitted evaporator designed to evaporate only water, it's one thing. But when a cup of old waste solvent is left in a fume hood and magically disappears, it's another. While this may seem like a harmless way to get rid of dangerous chemicals, it is not. The hood may make you safe from vapors in your lab, but it doesn't make them safe everywhere else. That stuff is just going outside. If identified by an inspector, it's also a violation that tends to lead to a fine. Things that are recycled are usually considered waste as well. You may find that they are exempt for various reasons, but don't make that assumption. Put any recycled materials on your list of waste for now. We'll figure out later if they are regulated or not. One particular waste stream that seems to be difficult to identify is leftover solder paste. This is a frequently recycled waste that may well be regulated as hazardous even when recycled. Make a note of it. I mentioned earlier that some wastes are unused. In the first picture, we have a storage room containing numerous small containers of a wide variety of chemicals. It is very easy to lose track of which ones are needed and which aren't. As a result, materials are kept in storage for years or even decades beyond when they are needed, and no attempt is made to recycle or dispose of them. On other occasions, a container of material may be unusable because the container is damaged or dented. This is particularly true in retail businesses. Again, if no attempt is made to use, recycle, or dispose of these materials, they become waste, and you must consider whether or not they are a hazardous waste. Sometimes forgotten materials that become waste are tucked away in low-traffic areas at your facility or are in small amounts that are easily overlooked. Sometimes they look perfectly usable and are right under your nose in plain sight. This is one situation where asking lots of questions will help. Notice every container and every material. Employees are always looking for new and better ways to do things. Often, trial and error is required to accomplish this, and the materials used in those trials end up without a home. Check under desks and other obscure locations. Lab cabinets gather all kinds of odd materials. Out of sight, out of mind. Things become forgotten and ignored, setting you up for inspection trouble. Lab hoods are often thought of a safe haven for dangerous stuff. In addition to being a great way to evaporate or illegally dispose of dangerous things faster, they can become a place to accumulate materials when they aren't used anymore. You can have places in your main building that are isolated from frequent traffic. Often, material goes into storage because it won't be needed or it's in the way, so it's moved to a location where it won't interfere with frequent activities. Forgotten and ignored over time, the condition of the container and the material deteriorate until they become a waste and a problem. Any collection of odds and ends has the potential to contain a waste. What's more, a mishmash pile of stuff commonly holds things that are either forgotten and ignored, or are there because someone didn't know where the right place to put them was. Nothing says forget me like a storage out of the path of normal traffic. Sheds, outbuildings, and remote additions are all great places to find forgotten waste. If you don't get out there often, get there now. We all try to use chemicals that are less dangerous to ourselves and the environment, but it's easy to overlook spray cans of solvent adhesives and paints. Be careful if you're throwing out these things with liquid still in them. Sometimes these contain regulated solvents or toxic metals. Some will also contain a dangerous gas as a propellant. As an inspector, one of the first places I look for waste is in a flammable cabinet, and you should do the same. Just like cabinets in your lab, these cabinets are magnets for material that seem to be dangerous, but staff don't know what else to do with them. Materials in flammable cabinets become forgotten and ignored. That's always a recipe for trouble. Some wastes are overlooked because they are so common and obvious. Rags and absorbents are common wastes that we might use in our household, but in the work environment, the contaminants in these materials may be regulated as hazardous. Sandblasting grit is another waste stream that is often not recognized as hazardous. Consider not just what the waste is, but what it is contaminated with. The fact that these materials are so commonly used does not mean that they are not regulated. Many processes produce a spent filter as a waste. As with evaporators, filters can concentrate contaminants, resulting in wastes that are regulated hazardous waste. Sometimes the fact that a particular waste stream is scattered everywhere makes it seem less dangerous. The more familiar it is, the less we think about it, right? Dust can be a good example of that. The composition of the stuff the dust comes from is critical. If you're grinding metal, for instance, you may be making dust that contains one of the 8 regulated hazardous waste metals. It could also be a fire hazard. Almost every metal we work with is actually an alloy or a blend of different metals. For instance, stainless steel often contains regulated levels of chromium, and bronze and brass contain lead. When regulated dangerous metals like chromium and lead are in waste dust, there are 2 problems. First, because it's a waste, it's less likely to be managed like it has value and is more likely to end up in the wrong places. Second, dust is really easy to stir up in the air, contaminate your hands, or contaminate your clothes, so you can get it inside your body and may even bring it home to your family. Red cans, like the one you see on the screen here, are very common and important containers that are designed to store materials that catch on fire very easily. Sometimes these are products which aren't regulated as hazardous waste. But if they are holding waste, there's a good chance that it's regulated by us. Take a moment to find out what is stored in these containers. So there you have it. I hope you got some ideas of things to look at that may need more attention. Remember that finding out if you're regulated starts with identifying what waste you have. And because it's your business that chooses to use the materials and processes that create those wastes, you are responsible for understanding what they are. Once you identify what your wastes are, we can move on to figuring out if they're hazardous or not. We'll start that in our next presentation.